1, 2, 3, 4, yeah.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the RentPrep podcast. We've got a great show for you today. We're sitting down with Isabel Shapiro, who works for Peaceprints of Western New York, and it's a reentry program that helps people who are incarcerated find jobs, find places to live, and so they're coordinating a lot with landlords and helping to find them placement. So we're excited to talk with her today, and Isabel, thanks for being on the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the RentPrep podcast. We are at the RentPrep office today, and we've got a special guest with us. She is with a program that helps place people who have been convicted of crimes and coming out of prison and coming out of jail time, serving their time, and she's helping them find places to rent, which we thought was really interesting for landlords. And so we'd like to welcome Ms. Shapiro to our show today.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Steve and I know in the last few podcasts we've been talking about the home for landlord training that we went to, and actually Isabel was at the training that we were at, and just found her program really interesting, and we just had some questions for you because we wanted to learn more about exactly what your program, or Peaceprints of Western New York, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. We are an organization in Buffalo. We provide transitional housing for parolees and recently incarcerated men, and we try to provide wraparound reentry services by linking them with the resources that are available to them to really start putting the building blocks of their life back together. So first, they come to us at our Phase 1 facility. We have 24 beds available for 120 days, and they come directly out. They have nothing. We get them linked up with the Department of Social Services so they can start to get food stamps and cash assistance, and we help them get to their programs, and we try to provide as much support as we can.
Yeah. How long does that last for? Like if somebody's coming right out of prison, and they come into contact with the Peaceprints of Western New York, how long does that last for?
The day that they get there, their clock of 120 days starts at our Phase 1 facility called the Bissonette House. So they have 4 months, and then we have 11 beds at our Phase 2 facility, which is slightly more independent. It's not group living. We have staff on duty 24/7 at our Phase 1 facility. At our Phase 2 facility, there's no staff. They don't have to sign in and out. There are only 11 beds, but it's still group living. We have just recently opened a Phase 3 facility, which is basically just 4 totally independent one-bedroom apartments. Unfortunately, we can't put all of the guys that we get in the Phase 1 facility and move them all the way through because we just don't have the capacity. So my role is then to come in and start day one to start making a housing plan with the guys who are in our Phase 1 facility for only 120 days, to start making a plan for them to find their own place, to figure out what they need in a place, whether they need more supportive living when they leave, or if our goal is to find them a private apartment, and then we identify the steps that we need to take to get them there.
And so are you actively reaching out to landlords, maybe responding to their listing ads, things like that, to help place the people that you're working with and help find them that right fit?
Yeah, I'm on websites every day. I'm going to places like Home Inc. To try to connect with private landlords, to let them know about our program, to let them know that I'm available as a resource to them as much as I am to the guys that I work with, to try to find suitable tenants for them.
What do you feel like the response is from landlords? If you're reaching out to them cold and they didn't reach out to you, so they just have a listing ad, they're looking for applicants, and now you're calling them saying, hey, I've got this person in mind, and by the way, convicted of some crimes.
Yeah, I try to ease into it. Yeah. Usually I'm trying to introduce the person first. We usually try to refer to all of our clients as men who have been recently incarcerated because they are people first. And so that's the message that we try to enforce when we talk to landlords. I find that people are worried that they're going to be bad tenants, that they're going to mess up their property, the things that all landlords are worried about with other tenants, but then they have this idea, this stigma attached to criminal behavior that decreases their trust in them with their property, which is totally understandable, but often it is not the reality of the situation, especially depending on the guy.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is the timing of us learning about this, and then the new HUD guidelines that recently came out that no longer allow landlords to use blanket policies to deny applicants with a criminal record. So it's widely misinterpreted. We deal with it on a daily basis here with landlords, where it's this misconception that you can no longer deny somebody because of a criminal background. But really what HUD is trying to do is they're trying to make landlords stop and really take a look at the criminal records and how it relates to them as a renter. So how long ago did it happen? What was the nature of the crime and those type of things. So I think that your program just sort of aligns perfectly with the trend in the way that things are going, because it's forcing landlords to really take a hard look at it and say, okay, can I draw a nexus between this person and their crimes and how long ago it was and the fact that they're going to be a bad renter? And I think HUD's intentions is really to, again, make that landlord pause, think about it, because like you said, it doesn't always mean they're going to be a bad tenant. There's plenty of bad tenants that have no criminal records, so it's hard to say, criminal record equals bad tenant automatically, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, we were excited that HUD was taking an interest and really pushing for this. But it's also an exciting thing for landlords because it's a tool that you can use to contextualize someone's history when other things, like if they have a spotty rental history because they spent time in prison, other tools that are usually available to landlords to assess a tenant's worth or qualifications aren't available. And it also puts into perspective the crime that was committed, and especially the process and the steps that they've taken to become rehabilitated and the effort that they're putting in to reintegrate into society and to begin living a licit life, which is the goal, the genuine goal for most of them. And a lot of the time when guys are not given an opportunity to have their own space, to have a job, to start to do those things that we expect from regular members of society, then they're pressured and to go back to old ways. And they're put in situations where we end up relegating whole sections of society to second-class citizenship, which is the goal, I believe, for the HUD standards, to roll that back and to start to deal with some of the discriminatory things that are a part of mass incarceration.
Yeah, I found at the class we were at with Home, one of the things you said was interesting because, I mean, my landlord brain immediately went to like, all right, this is a pretty tough sell, what she's telling us right now. Because like on paper, if I had one person who was identical to another, but one had a crime, it would be tough to be swayed towards the one without the crime. And I understand what you're saying too, as far as that being a problem that kind of perpetuates too, if you can't give these people the opportunity. But one of the things you mentioned that I thought was interesting and worth sharing with the audience was the fact that you guys, I don't know if you call them case managers, but you have people that are going to act as kind of a conduit too between the landlord and the person that would be coming into the rental unit. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and what those people's roles are?
Sure. Well, my role personally is I get to know all of these guys the moment they get out, and I get to see their progress. And I'm one of many people who are in their lives who do the same thing. They have counselors through all the programs that are required by way of the stipulations of their parole. They have other case managers. They have case managers at the Department of Social Services. They have their parole officer. They have counselors at Spectrum or Horizon Human Services, which are the organizations that provide mental health counseling, drug abuse counseling, and anger management. They have people who are supporting them every step of the way, who get to know these guys really well, who are helping them make that transition and can also be a resource as a reference.
Yeah, I think, obviously being in the business of screening, I think really that's what caught my attention was knowing that you're placing people that ultimately have earned your trust and the trust of all the other people that are working with them. Right. So when you come to a landlord and you say, hey, we've got somebody, this person isn't literally straight out of incarceration. They've gone through the program. They've identified themselves as somebody that can successfully complete it and have earned the trust of the folks that are sort of watching over them and making sure they're taking the right steps. And now you're giving them that sort of final blessing saying, yeah, we'll stick our necks out, we'll give you that reference, and we want to get you placed, right?
Yeah, it's not an easy road the first 4 months of coming out of incarceration. And so we watch these guys do incredible things and work incredibly hard. And if we witness that and we say, this person we know is committed to their freedom and to building a new life for themselves, then we can tell that we've seen a lot of guys go through it. We can kind of tell who's going to succeed at some point and who's not. It's still just our best estimate of their abilities, but it's generally pretty accurate. And so we are happy to provide that resource to landlords at any point.
Well, I think it's funny that, in the screening process that landlords go through, a lot of it is just based on trust. And like you mentioned, if maybe they don't have the references for rental history, even if they haven't been incarcerated, that can certainly happen to, anybody where maybe they lived with family or maybe they're coming out of college or whatever the case is. But what's really kind of piqued my interest, again, was that in this case, you're dealing with that stigma of having some criminal records, but you've got a whole host of people now saying, hey, I'm going to vouch for this guy, and I think that he's on the right track. So I think there's some real value to that for sure from a screening perspective.
Yeah, and we hope to provide more and more of that. We hope to be the best advocates that we can possibly be. And one of the main driving things for me, at least in this profession, and I think for a lot of people in this profession, is that there are so many people who, had they been in a different situation growing up, had they not been impoverished, had they not been a person of color, would not have ended up in the criminal justice system. And there are a lot of other people who may be coming out of college or who had the ability to, if they hit some hard times, live with their parents for a little while. Whereas some of the guys that we work with, when they hit hard times, that was not an option for them. And maybe something else arose and they were just trying to do their best, but went down the wrong path and were punished for it and did their time and are coming out and are now see the error in their ways and really want to get back on track. And the most important thing that someone can do to help them is to give them a chance to explain that, which is what our organization is all about. And if we can be a conduit for their story to then get to the people who can give them the resources or who can just give them a chance at living in their apartment or giving them a job, like I said, that's what we're here for.
I know typically, like if you're doing references as a landlord, you might call previous landlords, and in this case, there's not going to be one necessarily.
Right.
What have you found when the landlords communicate? Like, who are they talking to as the references typically for this person?
Well, I think a lot of the times the guys don't even realize that they can list us as references. So we push that from the beginning. So I'm not sure for guys who are just getting out on their own, I'm not sure who they list as references. Probably they can definitely use their parole officer. They can definitely use their counselors. But often they will just say, I don't know. A lot of them have never had an apartment that was in their name. So we try to push that with them, that you can use the people in your life who you've had an impact on or who you've worked with. But that's not always self-evident to the guys.
Yeah.
So I know Eric and I are both kind of numbers geeks, right? We like to analyze numbers and look at data. What's the success rate in a program like this versus maybe coming straight out of incarceration, or just the overall success of this program that you've seen with landlords?
You're asking at a really good time because we just got our numbers in from 2016, and we had 22% of the guys that we had this past year ended up violating the terms of their parole, which is incredibly low for the first 4 months. Man, I'm blanking on the number, but
what's a typical, like you said 22% is low. Do you know what the typical rate is on that?
So about 75% of men who get out of prison will go back to prison within 3 to 5 years.
Wow, that's staggering.
2/3 of those people go back within the first 6 months. So that's something like 28% of the total. So we cut 2 months off of that, and we still have a lower percentage by 6%. And if you add on to that all the guys who come to us are the people who have nowhere else to go, who are by definition homeless, in unstable housing situation. Another term would be marginally housed, who are much more likely than those, even though I don't have exact numbers to indicate that, just
in some ways, though, I feel like that's almost for the better, right? You're pulling them from their environment, which, like you mentioned, may have gotten them into that trouble or led them down that path. And now you're putting them in a place really that's designed to let them succeed. So I almost see that as a benefit there for sure. Do you know what the success rate is for placement? So obviously you're going to place some people and maybe it doesn't work out, or maybe they run into problems. Do you know what those numbers are, or roughly what they would look like?
Yep. Out of about 111 people last year, we placed 62 in stable housing situations. Unfortunately, it's really hard to keep track once they leave. We try our best, but we have a limited staff and people change their phone numbers and, they move around and stuff. But in general, for the people who have stayed in touch with us, it's really good. I mean, the guys who make it past their first 6 months are much more likely to succeed. And so we help them through at least the first 4 months. And do our best to stay in touch, but unfortunately I don't have those specific numbers.
So if I'm a landlord and I really like the idea of this program, would there be a way for me to reach out to either Peaceprints or another reentry program and say, hey, I'm buying into it, I believe in this program, put me on your list, and now you're contacting them maybe first if you have people, and as a landlord, that might be a way for me to fill vacancies pretty quick.
Yeah, our office phone number, the way to reach me, Isabel Shapiro, is at 716-892-8224. You can find us on Facebook, Peaceprints of WNY. You can visit our website, peaceprintswny.org. All of those are great methods. Or you can just stop by and see our facility if you want. We're right across from ECMC, 335 Grider. Even if you don't have an apartment available, even if you just want to be a part of the organization, even if you're just more interested in what we do, you have more questions, we would love for anybody to reach out and to be a part of our community.
And I know Eric and I, before we jumped on the podcast, we're just sort of digging around a little bit to see other states and what they're offering. And I think what we found is the key word that you're looking for is a reentry program. And we actually found a state listing. Is that right?
Yeah. If you just Google reentry program, you can get a couple different listings you can kind of poke around on and see if there's a program in your local area too, if you're not local to the Western New York area. So.
Yeah, it's funny, being in the screening business for a long time, I kind of get keyholed a lot of times into being this person who is just super discriminatory, and you know what I mean? And what we're doing couldn't be farther from the truth. We're looking at the information and trying to give landlords all the information that they need to make an educated, smart decision.
And I think that often as an advocate for parolees, I get keyholed, I guess, in the opposite way, where people think that I'm asking people to ignore their history and ignore these things about them. That's absolutely not the case either. I want people to get to know the guys on their own terms, is what it is. Instead of looking at, an offense on a piece of paper, my main concern is just getting people to talk to these guys that I work with, because I work with some incredible men who are working way harder than so many people I know who are doing so much better in life, which is unfortunate because they have all of these things working against them.
Yeah, I would think just in general, if somebody was coming through this program and they had a stable job that they just got, and then they had this one opportunity for, a place to call their own, that at least, it's hard to put myself in their shoes, but I would think that the amount of loyalty and just hard work that you'd be willing to put in, because maybe this is the first chance that you felt like you ever got from anybody.
Exactly.
So yeah, I could just see somebody really kind of just, having the opportunity of being a tremendous renter because of that.
Yeah. Everybody wants to have a stake in their community, to have a stake in their own space. Everybody has a right to a home. Unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers for some folks. The demographic that I work with specifically, I think, faces a lot of barriers, which I don't fault anybody for judging someone based on something in their past. But I think that specifically the HUD guidelines and in general, just an informal interview are great tools to contextualize someone's past, to let them tell you their story and to let them tell you where they're at their present.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, too, because, I'm not very well versed on this, but, from the occasional 60 Minutes program I catch or something, I guess it's kind of common knowledge that there are a lot of people in prison. The U.S. just kind of, at some point, just started, incarcerating more and more people. And at the same time, Steve can probably speak to this better than I could, but probably the housing bubble burst, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of renters. So in some ways, it kind of makes sense, because if the tides start to turn where they start trying to get more and more people out of prison, especially for minor crimes, things that may even be legal depending on the state you live in now, that you would think that there's going to be these people looking for a place to live, and there's going to be, a surplus of renters too. So,
Yeah, for sure. And, my experience in the credit industry is funny because all the data that we work with sort of has a shelf life, right? We believe as a society, at least here in America, that everybody deserves the second chance. That's why things on your credit report only last 7 years. That's why, reportable bankruptcy or a judgment or a lien or something, they all have shelf lives. And I think the same sort of philosophy is what you guys are upholding and saying the same thing. There's a shelf life here. This person may have had some issues, but they've come out, they're working really hard. So I draw a lot of parallels to credit,
Yeah, and unfortunately, credit sometimes also compounds the issue of having a criminal record, because you would not believe. I've started running credit reports for everybody that I have an intake with, because you would not believe the number of people who have had major credit issues happen while they're incarcerated, whether it's because a family member took out utility bills in their name or a phone bill, or because they had child support payments when they went away. And then over the course of their prison term, those child support payments may have been on the minimum, but they got turned up to the maximum payments while they were away. So I just talked to somebody who has now $45,000 in debt for child support because of that, which it should be a fraction of that.
And so did this person have like a support judgment then placed against them for that money?
We're still working to figure it out, but he just came into the house maybe last week, I think, and we ran his credit report, and we were like, what? How did this happen?
Right.
And it happens a lot. I mean, it's hard when you go into prison to call National Grid and to call Verizon and say, hey, I'm now in prison. Can you turn off my services? So unfortunately, credit checks can sometimes double down on this issue, which again is a point where it takes a lot of generosity, but to allow people to explain their situation in life is really helpful.
Have you seen any trends or anything like that as far as the type of landlords or places that you have had success in placing people in your program?
Mainly small-scale private landlords who, like I said, will deal with people on a one-on-one basis. We do still fill out applications for Buffalo Municipal Housing or for larger organizations like People Inc. for senior housing, but there are such long wait lists and such demand that we don't put a lot of weight onto those applications, as opposed to just reaching out to landlords one-on-one, usually who have a couple properties and are just looking for someone to take care of them.
Yeah, there's been a lot of, responsibility, I think, as of late, the private sector as landlords, not only because HUD is sort of looking at municipal housing and project housing as a huge failure, and that's where programs like Section 8 and assisted living are starting to come more into play. And we see it here on the screening side, basically, as some landlords will tell you rental history means everything, or great references mean everything. And they'll tell you, I've got 10 tenants and every one of them has terrible credit, but they're great renters for me, So I think, Eric, to kind of answer your question, the ideal landlord or the people that are looking or that would be receptive towards this are sort of the landlords that are willing to look at things a bit more objectively or kind of consider alternative resources or alternative data and not just looking at things in such a black and white way and saying, well, automatic mark against you, you've got this or you've got that. They're willing to dig a little deeper, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it's, a lot of the responsibility to make some pretty major changes in communities lies on the landlord. And I don't know if anybody's been following what's happening with HUD and Ben Carson and everything else. Landlords are going to have more and more of that responsibility fall onto their shoulders in the future, the very near future. So this is going to be a more hot topic as we move along.
Yeah, and I think it might be too much to ask, but when people are considering who to rent to, it's partially deciding what kind of society that you want to live in. Because if you want to live in a more punitive, discriminatory society, then by all means, carrying on with the legacy of mass incarceration that has caused so many rifts in families and communities, then by all means, but you have the opportunity, if you have a unit or a place to live, to start to make some steps in one person's life, in one community, to a more integrated and wholesome society.
Excellent. Well, landlords, our call to action would be, if you're the type of landlord that is willing to have an open mind, I think first and foremost, and willing to be that type of person that gives somebody a second chance, or willing to, want to reach out and try to help somebody and really feel like you're having a major impact. I think this is a great way to really have an immediate impact on somebody's life.
Absolutely.
And as the landlord, they still have the choice at the end of the day. So if they're meeting this person and something's just not clicking, obviously they've got that choice, but I think it's at least worth a consideration.
I do too. And you will earn someone's lifelong gratitude. I've had guys just break down in tears in my office when they get their first apartment, and it's like nothing you've ever experienced.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. And if you happen to be listening and you're local to the Buffalo, New York area, you can check out Peaceprints Western New York, or I should say peaceprintswny.org. And I see on the website here there's opportunities to volunteer.
Yes.
You guys are a non-for-profit, so I'm sure there's opportunities to donate if you happen to not be in the area. But, maybe you decide you're not quite ready to, rent to somebody who's just getting out, but you like the story, you like what's going on here, you could definitely reach out, and I'm sure they'll accept donations too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. And again, any landlords that are out there listening, give it a shot. Check it out. Check out reentry programs in your area. Again, I think there's some success there, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for landlords too. All right, Eric, I think that's it for the show. Again, Isabel, thanks for coming in and sharing everything with us. And Eric, we'll see you next time.
All right, sounds good. See you guys.